Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Sarah Manasra. I am the clarinet professor at UW's Stevens Point. I teach clarinet and music theory here. I'm going to talk a little bit about the WSMA Clarinet Etude for 2021. I'm going to give you a couple tips and tricks. I'm going to talk you through the grace notes, a little bit about phrasing, how to choose a tempo, and then some just general ideas behind this piece. So the very first thing that I would like to talk about is tempo. I think the biggest pitfall that students will have is not picking quite the right tempo. Allegretto in 6/8 is actually a tricky tempo to figure out because we have several things that we can do. We can feel the allegretto in the eighth note, or we can feel it in the big beat, so 1 and 2. Okay. I think if we feel it in 1 and 2, it will not be as effective as if we're feeling kind of a waltz tempo with the eighth notes. So if we were to play it with a big beat allegretto, which means a little less than allegro, with the big beats, at the beginning it would sound okay. I'll demonstrate here. Okay, so that's okay. It's a little rushed, but you could still be musical. However, it's not until you get to the 16th notes, which looks like measure 33 or pick up to measure 33, that it starts to really seem rushed. And while it can be impressive to do that, I feel like musicality is much more important. If you're not able to make something musical, then you need to rethink it. Okay, so that just seems a little rushed to me. And then finally, when we get down to the grace notes, it just sounds a little ridiculous when you're going super allegretto in the big beats. So what really informs my tempo choices is, can it sound musical all the way through? And because of that, I believe that the eighth note is actually where the allegretto lies. So instead of going da 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 da, I think ya da dee ya da da. So it's kind of a little bit of a waltz feel, a boom, chick, chick, boom, chick, chick. And you can be a lot more musical and a lot more flexible. So here's how that sounds. And then at the measure 33, pick up to measure 33, we can be a lot more snaky and musical with these 16th notes. So on and so forth. So it still is impressive, but it's much more musical and more compelling for the audience. And remember, we're always trying to think, how can we sell this music to someone? Okay, and musicality is always the answer. So I choose to feel the eighth notes in kind of a waltz tempo. So let's talk just briefly about phrasing. There are two main kinds of phrases that pop up in this. And you can use understanding the type of phrase to help you decide how you want to shape this. So the first kind of phrase is a call and response, and you can find this in the first 4 bars. In general, you'll see these in groups of 4, okay? So it's an idea and then a response to the idea. So in the very beginning, here's the first idea. Okay, and now we respond to that idea. Okay, and I take a breath after that E. I know there's a slur over it, but it is what we call an elision, which means the end of the phrase and the beginning of the next phrase are actually the same note. So I round it out, take a breath, and then continue on with the G. Just a side note. So the reason why we use this call and response to help us decide what to do musically is we can ask ourselves, do we want this one phrase to start louder, softer, or the same than the next? And if we can group them together, we understand that there is a relationship and we can ask that question. Okay, so there's a relationship between these first two and second two bars, and I believe that the second two, because they're higher, and the response needs to be a little bit louder. Okay, you always want to decrescendo at the end of the phrase, no matter what. Everybody knows that the end of the phrase is coming, at least in this piece, not all pieces, but in this particular etude, you always want to decrescendo at the end of the phrase. Now the second type of phrase that will show up, you actually can see after the fermata bar, which is measure 17 or pick up to 17. Okay, this is what we call a sentence. It's three things that belong together. Okay, it's three phrase groups, or three phrases in a group. What is characteristic of this is that the first two are very similar. It's the same melodic material. And the second one is a continuation, and I'll demonstrate what I mean by that. But it's you say something, you say it again, and then you move on. You complete your thought. Okay? So here you have the first one. We say it again, and because it's higher, and it's the second time you say it, and usually when you repeat yourself, you're a little more agitated, we make it a little louder. Now we've made our point and we can complete our thought. I think this is the loudest one because it's higher and it's new material. That's not always how it works, but I think in this case it works well. And then another sentence comes, so you can use this phrase structure to phrase your musicality again. All right, so let's talk just a little bit about the cadenza and the grace notes, because these are the trickiest parts, I think, trying to figure out how to practice them. With the cadenza, I think the general tendency is to try to rush through it because they're very small, very fast-looking notes. In my opinion, I like to slow down going up to that high B. So we're moving into 13, 14, measure 15 going into 16. So I slow down those last 3/8 notes and hit that high B on the fermata, and I really settle there. I would probably get a nice mezzo forte, really sing through it, and then you can begin to back out. And what I like to do is start the cadenza slow and then speed up at the same time I'm decrescendoing, which can be a little tricky. So I would practice the two things separately. Practice exactly how you want to play the cadenza and exactly how you want to play the dynamics. And I'll show you that. So it'll sound like this. Typically when we want to speed up, we crescendo. So I would just practice getting it exactly the way you want dynamically. All right, and then you can begin to add the notes in, and then you want to get the speed of the notes just the way you want it. Okay, and then you put those two together. The next thing I would say is don't rush through it all. That's very, very, very much a tendency with clarinets. The moment we see a cadenza, we're like, oh, here we go. So we really want to make this as musical as possible. That's my catchphrase, really. And if we rush through it, it just sounds a little odd. It's not really satisfying to listen to. So record yourself and listen to how you're doing it and decide, is that really satisfying to listen to? And if it is, and you're happy with it, then that's the way you should play it. All right, let's talk grace notes. So the grace notes start in measure 57, okay? All of the grace notes except for 3 instances I play before the beat. That means that I'm borrowing time from the note before. Okay, so in the very first measure of a grace note in measure 57, the second E is the one that I'm shortening so that the third E, or on big beat 2, can land right on the beat. So it sounds like this. Okay, so if I start the metronome, da da ba. Okay, you want that E to land right on the beat. And that is the way that I practice all of these grace notes except for 3. And those 3 are in measure 62. Okay, you have these groups of 3 16th notes and then 3 8th notes. I put these grace notes right on the beat. You can decide not to, that's really up to you, but I think that they sound really nice because it's a descending scale. It sounds really nice to put it on the beat. And that means that I'm borrowing time from the first note of every grouping, of the first 8th note. So it'll sound like this. I'll start measured halfway through measure 60. So those are the 3 that I actually put on the beat. All of the others I borrow time from before. One thing that I would really like to emphasize is set your metronome to slow 8th notes and practice without the grace notes and then practice the grace notes end. So I've set a metronome to 80. And I'm going to play, for example, measure 69. I'm going to play without the grace notes, and this is the 8th note. And I get the rhythm just right, okay? Then I add the grace notes in. And because they are before the beat, I'm borrowing time from the note before, okay? Once you do that, you can slowly speed it up until you get it exactly where you want it tempo-wise. I even messed that up. Let me try it one more time. Okay. So I would start very slow with the 8th note metronome and go up maybe 1 or 2 at a time. It might seem really tedious, and it can be really tedious, but you're really going to love the result. So the final things that I would add are just general clarinet things. Remember that you want steady air. When you want your throat tones to be the same airspeed as your longer over the break notes. For example, at the beginning, it is really a tendency for clarinetists to dip their air on that first 2 notes because they're easier to blow. But if you really keep your airstream, it's so much smoother to get over the break. So I'll demonstrate bad airflow right now. We've all had that little hub going over the break. So what we need to do is make sure that the E and the G, the air is just as strong and as fast. And you might think it's going to squeak or it's going to pop out, but I promise it won't. So you want to keep nice fast air. And that's really going to smooth out your phrases. The next thing that I would say is really plan out your breathing. Decide exactly where you want to breathe and ask yourself, does it make sense musically? Write your breaths in and practice your breaths. I think people don't practice their breathing enough. And then when they get nervous or they're having to record something or they don't really spend much time thinking, it can kind of feel disjunct or you can feel like I'm going to run out of air. So I would definitely plan your breaths in and using the information that we talked about the different kinds of phrases that are in here, either the call and response or the short, short, long, is going to help you decide exactly where to breathe. Always breathe when you need a breath. I apologize for my email sounds. So with that, I believe that is all I have to say right now. If you have any questions, feel free to email me if you'd like to hear a performance of it. I have one on my YouTube channel, The Wisconsin Clarinetist. And if you would like a free lesson, I'm happy to give you one. Just send me an email at smanasre@uwsp.edu. Good luck on the audition, and I hope you all have a wonderful time preparing this music.